Greetings Terrarians, Khaios here. The weekly poll held on my Discord server has determined that today's time-lapse build is going to be something from Pirates of the Caribbean, so I've decided to try my own take on the Black Pearl. If you're wondering why I'm releasing the video on Tuesday rather than on my usual Mondays, it's because I've decided to make some changes to my schedule. For now at least, I'm going to be returning to my old 3 video a week schedule, so I'll be uploading on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. With that out of the way, let's get on to the build. I'm starting this build off above the water just because it's a little easier to work with. I don't have to worry about building in the water and worry about having to potentially drown or have to swim constantly. And furthermore, I don't need to worry about messing up the water level on accident, because for me, when it comes to building a ship in Terraria, there's nothing worse than when the left side of the water is uneven with the right side of the water. So I'm going to be building this above the ocean, and then once the build is done, I'll be hopping into T-Edit to lower it down into the water. Of course, if I decided not to do this with T-Edit, I would just go ahead and build it straight into the water. I just wanted to make things a little bit easier for me. So for the front of the ship, the reason why it has that flat edge on the very nose of the bow of the ship is because the Black Pearl kind of has this flat edge with a mast coming out straight off the front. So I wanted to do something similar like that. I can't quite get the exact same effect, and I also can't get the statue on the front of it, but I thought I could do something pretty similar. In terms of materials so far, I'm working with Dynasty wood for the floors, and then the outer edge is living wood painted black, and I also have some rich mahogany on the part that I'm working on right now. The lantern that I'm building is with some topaz gemspark block, some rope for the grate, and it's capped on the top and the bottom with some copper plating painted gray. It makes for a really nice custom lantern feature that honestly looks pretty similar, in my opinion at least, to the ones that were found on the original ship. The masts are just gray painted living wood that has been actuated in the background so you could easily walk in front of them. And I'm lining the ship with a lot of fences that have been painted gray, and the reason why I'm using gray is because the body of the ship is going to be largely black and gray, and I just want to have some accents and some balances. So as you can see, the bottom edge is entirely black, so having the gray fences along the edges on the top just makes it look a little more appealing. And I'm making the rudder almost entirely out of walls here and fences. So I've got some shadewood fence, rich mahogany wall, and then it's being attached to the ship itself with some Dynasty wood painted gray, and then there's some gaps where the slopes are in the background that I just filled in with a little bit more fence. I'm lining the top and the bottom of each deck with some rich mahogany that's been painted gray, and then the background wall is made out of boreal wood planks. These large windows are made with stained glass, the purple and the red ones, painted black and made in an alternating pattern just because it gives us nice bars through the window that makes it look like there's actually different panes of glass in each checkered segment. As the captain's quarters should have the most decoration, I'm kind of putting a table in there. The chest is actually a music box. Got the table, and I'm just throwing a little bit more detailed decoration into the captain's quarters. Now I'm adding some shadewood wall that's been painted gray as some support beams, mostly not to just mimic the ribbing of the ship, but to just give a little bit of contrast to all of the horizontal walls that we have in this build. It's really long and it's really redundant, so having these vertical patterns every so often really helps offset that and just change up the build enough to keep it interesting. Now I'm just knocking out some bits of walls for portholes. For the cannons, I'm experimenting around with trying to place a trapdoor there. I thought that I could place 2 blocks on either side and then actuate them and use the trapdoor as the door for the porthole, but unfortunately, unlike normal doors, which you can actuate the block above, you cannot actuate the block on either side of the trapdoors, so I had to scrap that idea, and instead I just went with open areas that have been flanked with fences to keep the windows nice and narrow, and then I'm going to place a cannon in front of each one of them. The top deck will only have 2 cannons, and it's going to largely be quarters and dining area for the crew, so I'm going to place a couple of rooms, so that's why we have some doors up there. The bottommost deck is going to be the storage of the ship, so we've got a bunch of crates of the wooden and iron variety, barrels, and chests. For the ship's wheel, I thought it might look a little bit better if I did something with spikes. So I painted some brown spikes and then actuated them so you don't actually walk into them and take damage. And I figured that it turned out to be a fairly decent looking ship wheel. I'm using some living rich mahogany painted brown and actuated for rope on any of the diagonal segments of the rigging for the ship, just because I feel that it looks a lot better than having the actual rope, which you cannot slope in any way, shape, or form. I do save rope for strictly segments that are vertical, like where you would climb up the mast, but for the diagonal segments, I decided to go with this living mahogany. In the gaps where the rope meets blocks, I'm placing some ebonwood fence painted brown where it looks somewhat similar to the rope, so it kind of fills in that gap with the same color and very similar texture without leaving just a gap where the rope just doesn't look quite right. As for the sails, I usually struggle with this perspective of the ship where I want to show more sail, but if I make the sail sideways, it just doesn't make sense towards the ship, and that's why building ships for me in 2D is just a little bit more difficult. So I decided to just go with a straight from the side view. I didn't want to make the sails look tilted, otherwise they might look like they were facing sideways, which would make no sense at all. Usually when I build a ship, I like to build it in the other perspective so you could see the rear of the ship directly facing you and not the side of the ship, but I wanted this one to be usable and livable, and honestly it would be hard to identify it as a black pearl if it was just facing the back of the ship. So now I'm into T-Edit to lower the ship, and I drained the water out of the bottom part of the ship since I lowered it into the water, and I'm just adding Jolly Roger. I decided to take a gloom statue, chop it up using T-Edit, and use some white painted silly balloon to just get the crossed sword effect. And that is the Black Pearl done. I hope you enjoyed the build. If you did, be sure to leave a like and a comment. It really helps me out. I wanted to thank you all very much for watching. If you'd like to participate in the poll for next week's time-lapse build, be sure to check out my Discord server. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. Thank you all very much for watching. I'll catch you all later. Happy building.